Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent afternoons at the mall or talking about boys, she was in her backyard, teaching herself to shoot targets with her father's old rifle. Her dad, a Vietnam veteran, had passed away when she was 12, leaving behind only his military medals and a deep respect for service that had shaped Sarah's entire worldview. At 18, Sarah walked into the Marine Corps recruitment office in downtown Houston. The recruiter, Staff Sergeant Johnson, looked up from his paperwork with barely concealed surprise. Sarah was barely 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed maybe 120 pounds soaking wet. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a faded t-shirt that read, "Remember the Fallen." "Can I help you, miss?" Staff Sergeant Johnson asked, assuming she was there to ask about a boyfriend or brother who had enlisted. "I want to join the Marines," Sarah said simply, her voice steady and clear. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Johnson had seen plenty of young men and women walk through his doors, but Sarah looked like she belonged in a college library, not a military barracks. Still, he had a job to do, and everyone deserved to hear the facts. "The Marines are different from the other branches," he began, launching into his standard speech. "We don't make soldiers. We make Marines. It's the toughest training in the world, and not everyone who starts actually finishes." Sarah listened politely, nodding at appropriate moments. When he finished, she asked, "When can I take the practice test?" 2 weeks later, Sarah scored in the top 5% on her Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. Her physical fitness test results were solid, though not exceptional. What impressed Johnson most was her attitude. While other recruits complained about the early morning workouts or the push-ups, Sarah simply showed up and did what was asked of her. The night before she left for boot camp at Parris Island, Sarah's mother, Maria, sat on the edge of her daughter's bed. Maria had immigrated from Mexico as a young woman and worked 2 jobs to keep their small family afloat after Sarah's father died. She understood sacrifice, but sending her only daughter into what many considered a man's world terrified her. "Mija, you don't have to prove anything to anyone," Maria said softly, using the Spanish endearment she had called Sarah since childhood. "I'm not trying to prove anything, Mama," Sarah replied. "I'm trying to become something." The next morning, Sarah boarded a bus bound for South Carolina. She carried only a small duffel bag and her father's dog tags, which she wore under her civilian clothes. The bus was filled with other recruits, mostly young men who talked loudly about how tough they were and how easy Marine training would be for them. Sarah sat quietly in the back, watching the Texas landscape give way to Louisiana swampland, then Mississippi farmland, and finally the low country of South Carolina. She wasn't thinking about how tough the training would be. She was thinking about her father and how proud he would have been to see her following in his footsteps. Parris Island was like stepping into another world. The moment the bus doors opened, drill instructors were screaming at the recruits to move faster, stand straighter, and shut their mouths. Sarah had expected this from everything her father had told her about military training, but many of her fellow recruits seemed genuinely shocked by the intensity. "Welcome to Parris Island," bellowed drill instructor Staff Sergeant Williams, a mountain of a man whose voice could probably be heard in the next county. "For the next 13 weeks, your sorry civilian lives are over. You belong to me now, and I will either make you into Marines or send you home crying to your mothers." The first few days were a blur of medical examinations, paperwork, haircuts, and uniform fittings. Sarah's long brown hair fell to the floor in the barber shop, leaving her with a regulation-length cut that made her look even younger than her 18 years. Some of the male recruits snickered when they saw her, making comments about how she looked like a little boy. Sarah ignored them. She had not come here to win popularity contests. The real training began with physical conditioning. Every morning at 0500 hours, the recruits were awakened by the sound of trash cans being kicked down the squad bay. They had exactly 3 minutes to be dressed, beds made to military standards, and standing at attention beside their racks. The first morning, Sarah was ready in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Several male recruits were still struggling with their boot laces when time was called, earning them push-ups and verbal correction from the drill instructors. Martinez, Staff Sergeant Williams, called out during the first week's physical training session. Front and center. Sarah jogged to the front of the formation, her heart pounding. In boot camp, being singled out usually meant you had done something wrong. Recruits, take a good look at Martinez here, Williams announced to the group. She weighs maybe 120 pounds, and she just outran half of you sorry excuses for future Marines. If you're getting beat by someone who has to shop in the children's section, maybe you need to reconsider your life choices. The comment drew nervous laughter from some recruits, but Sarah felt the sting of being reduced to her size and gender. Still, she kept her expression neutral and her mouth shut. In boot camp, talking back was never an option. The weeks that followed tested every recruit in ways they had never imagined. There were forced marches with full packs in the South Carolina heat. There were obstacle courses that seemed designed by someone who hated the human body. There were hours of close order drill, learning to move as a unit with precision and purpose. Sarah excelled at marksmanship training. Her years of practice in her backyard had given her a natural understanding of breathing, sight alignment, and trigger control. While other recruits struggled to hit targets at 200 yards, Sarah consistently scored expert-level results. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Martinez asked drill instructor Sergeant Rodriguez during one training session. "My father taught me the basics." Drill instructor Rodriguez, Sarah replied. He was a Marine in Vietnam. Rodriguez nodded with what might have been approval. In the Marines, family military service was respected regardless of the recruit's gender or size. But marksmanship was only one part of Marine training. There were also classes on military history, first aid, and combat tactics. There were inspections where every button, every crease, and every piece of equipment had to be perfect. There were leadership exercises where recruits took turns commanding their peers through various scenarios. It was during one of these leadership exercises that Sarah first encountered serious resistance from her fellow recruits. The scenario involved planning and executing a simulated assault on an enemy position. Sarah had been chosen as the squad leader for her team, which included 8 male recruits. "This is ridiculous," muttered recruit Thompson, a stocky kid from Ohio who had played football in high school. "How is she supposed to lead us into combat when she can barely carry her own pack?" Sarah heard the comment, but pretended she hadn't. Instead, she gathered her team around a sand table model of the objective and began explaining her plan. She had studied the terrain carefully and identified several weaknesses in the mock enemy position. "Thompson and Jackson will provide covering fire from this ridge," she explained, pointing to a small hill that offered good visibility of the target. "Williams and Chun will move around to the left flank, while Rodriguez and I take the right. Once we're in position, Thompson's team will shift fire to allow the assault elements to close with the objective." The plan was sound, and most of the team seemed to understand their roles. But Thompson continued to grumble under his breath about taking orders from a girl. When the exercise began, everything went smoothly at first. Sarah's team moved into position without being detected by the drill instructors who were playing the role of enemy forces. The covering fire team set up on schedule, and the flanking elements began their movement toward the objective. But as they approached the target, Thompson's team stopped providing covering fire. Sarah could see Thompson and his partner talking instead of watching their assigned sectors. The drill instructors immediately noticed the gap in the covering fire and began engaging Sarah's assault team with simulated gunfire. "We're taking casualties because Thompson's not doing his job," Sarah whispered to her partner. She had to make a quick decision. Either abort the assault and accept failure, or continue and hope Thompson would remember his training. Sarah decided to continue. She led her assault team in a swift movement to the objective, using terrain features to mask their approach. Despite the lack of proper covering fire, they managed to reach the target and complete the exercise. When the drill instructors called the exercise complete, Staff Sergeant Williams gathered the team for an after-action review. "Martinez, explain what went wrong with your plan," Williams ordered. Sarah stood at attention and chose her words carefully. Drill instructor Williams, the plan was sound, but execution broke down when the covering fire team failed to maintain their assigned positions and fields of fire. Williams turned to Thompson. Thompson, do you have something to say about Martinez's leadership? Thompson stood up straighter. Drill instructor Williams, I don't think she has the command presence necessary to lead Marines in combat. The silence that followed was deafening. Other recruits looked uncomfortable, knowing that Thompson had just crossed a line. Criticizing fellow recruits was one thing, but questioning someone's ability to lead Marines was a serious accusation. Command presence, Williams repeated slowly. You think Martinez lacks command presence? Yes, drill instructor Williams. Williams walked over to Thompson until they were standing face to face. Thompson, let me explain something to you about command presence. Command presence isn't about how loud you can yell or how big your muscles are. Command presence is about making the right decisions under pressure and getting your people to follow you even when things get tough. Martinez just led a successful assault despite the fact that her covering fire team abandoned their post. That's command presence. Thompson's face reddened, but he said nothing more. The incident marked a turning point in Sarah's boot camp experience. Some recruits began to respect her abilities, while others became more resentful. The tension came to a head during the final weeks of training, when recruits were subjected to the Crucible, a 3-day field exercise designed to test everything they had learned. The Crucible involved little sleep, limited food, and constant physical and mental challenges. Teams of recruits had to work together to overcome obstacles that required not just individual strength, but collective problem-solving and leadership. Sarah found herself assigned to a team that included Thompson and several other recruits who had made their skepticism about female Marines clear throughout training. As they prepared for the first day's challenges, Sarah could sense the tension in the group. The first obstacle was a wall that stood 12 feet high. Teams had to get all members over the wall using only the equipment they carried and their own collective strength. It was the type of challenge where Sarah's smaller size would normally be a disadvantage. But Sarah had an idea. Instead of trying to boost the largest team members over the wall first, she suggested they start with the lightest members and use a human pyramid approach. The heaviest recruits would form a base, medium-sized recruits would climb onto their shoulders, and the lightest recruits would go over the wall first and then help pull others up from the other side. That's not how we practiced it, Thompson objected. The big guys go first and pull everyone else up. The big guys are tired, Sarah pointed out. Look at Rodriguez. He's been carrying extra equipment all morning because his pack frame broke. If we ask him to boost people over the wall, he's going to hurt himself. The team argued for several precious minutes before agreeing to try Sarah's approach. It worked perfectly. The lighter recruits, including Sarah herself, went over the wall quickly and were able to help pull the heavier team members up from the other side. They completed the obstacle faster than any other team that day. As the Crucible continued, Sarah's leadership abilities became more apparent to everyone, including the recruits who had initially doubted her. She was always the first to volunteer for dangerous or unpleasant tasks. When other recruits were exhausted and ready to quit, she found ways to motivate them to keep going. On the final night of the Crucible, as the recruits sat around a small campfire eating their meager rations, Thompson approached Sarah. Martinez, he said quietly, so the others wouldn't hear. I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you. Sarah looked up at him. We're all here to become Marines, Thompson. That's all that matters. Thompson nodded and walked back to his spot around the fire. It wasn't a grand gesture, but for Sarah, it represented something important. She had earned the respect of her peers through her actions, not her words. The next morning, the surviving recruits completed their final march back to the barracks. They had started as a group of individual civilians 13 weeks earlier. Now they moved as a unit, their steps synchronized, and their bearing unmistakably military. That evening, they would participate in the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor ceremony, officially becoming United States Marines. But first, they had one final formation with their drill instructors. Staff Sergeant Williams stood before the new Marines, his expression serious. "Recruits, in a few hours you will earn the title of Marine. Some of you have surprised me during this training. Some of you have disappointed me. But all of you have met the standard, or you wouldn't be standing here." He paused and looked directly at Sarah. Martinez stepped forward. Sarah's heart pounded as she took 3 steps forward and stood at attention in front of the formation. "Marines," Williams announced. "Take a good look at Martinez. She weighs 120 pounds, she's 5 feet 4 inches tall, and she just completed the same training as everyone else in this formation. She didn't ask for special treatment, she didn't make excuses, and she didn't quit when things got tough. She is a Marine." Williams looked directly into Sarah's eyes. "Martinez, you've earned something that can never be taken away from you. Welcome to the Brotherhood." As Sarah stood there in front of her fellow Marines, she thought about her father and how proud he would have been. She had come to Parris Island as a civilian girl from Texas. She was leaving as a United States Marine, ready to serve her country with honor, courage, and commitment. The road ahead would bring new challenges, but Sarah had already proven something important to herself and to others. Size and gender didn't determine who could be a Marine. Character did, and Sarah Martinez had character in abundance. 6 months after graduating from Parris Island, Lance Corporal Sarah Martinez found herself at Camp Pendleton, California, assigned to the 1st Marine Division. The California base was massive, housing thousands of Marines and their families. Unlike the controlled environment of boot camp, Camp Pendleton felt like a real military community where Marines lived, worked, and trained for actual deployments. Sarah's new unit was Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Marine Regiment. The company was commanded by Captain Michael Roberts, a veteran of 2 deployments to Afghanistan who had earned a Bronze Star for his leadership under fire. Roberts had a reputation for being tough but fair, and he expected excellence from every Marine in his command. When Sarah reported to the company headquarters on a warm Monday morning in March, she was directed to the office of 1st Sergeant Patricia Martinez. The coincidence of sharing the same last name wasn't lost on either woman, though they were not related. "So, you're the Marine who impressed the drill instructors at Parris Island," 1st Sergeant Martinez said, looking up from Sarah's service record book. "Top marks in marksmanship, leadership scores, and physical fitness. Impressive for any Marine, especially one fresh out of boot camp." "Thank you, 1st Sergeant," Sarah replied, standing at attention. "Don't thank me yet, Lance Corporal. This is the Fleet Marine Corps, not boot camp. Here, we train for real missions against real enemies. You'll be assigned to 2nd Platoon under Staff Sergeant Davis. He's a good Marine who served 3 combat deployments. Listen to him, learn from him, and maybe you'll become a decent Marine yourself." 2nd Platoon was housed in a barracks building that looked like it had been built sometime during the Cold War. The walls were painted that particular shade of military green that seemed to exist nowhere else on Earth, and the floors were polished to a shine that could blind aircraft pilots. Sarah's squad leader was Corporal James Wilson, a tall, lanky Marine from Alabama who had joined the Corps straight out of high school. Wilson had been in the Marines for 3 years and was known for his expertise with the M249 squad automatic weapon and his ability to navigate through any terrain without getting lost. "Martinez, you'll be in 2nd Squad," Wilson told her as he showed her to her assigned rack in the squad bay. "We've got a good group of Marines here. Some have been deployed, some haven't. What matters is that everyone pulls their weight and looks out for their teammates." The squad bay housed 12 Marines, with 6 metal bunk beds arranged along the walls. Each Marine had a small wall locker for their personal belongings and a foot locker at the base of their rack for military gear. The space was cramped, but it was home. Sarah quickly learned that life in a Fleet Marine unit was very different from boot camp. There was more freedom, but also more responsibility. Marines were expected to maintain their own equipment, keep up with physical fitness standards, and constantly improve their military skills through training exercises. Her first major training exercise came just 2 weeks after she arrived at Camp Pendleton. The entire battalion was scheduled to participate in a month-long desert training exercise at the 29 Palms Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center, located in California's Mojave Desert. 29 Palms was notorious among Marines for its harsh conditions. Summer temperatures could reach 120 degrees Fahrenheit, while winter nights could drop below freezing. The terrain was rocky, dusty, and unforgiving, with little vegetation and even less shade. "Welcome to the Stumps," Staff Sergeant Davis announced as the company's vehicles rolled through the front gate of 29 Palms. The nickname came from the Joshua trees that dotted the landscape, their twisted branches resembling the stumps of long-dead trees. The training scenario involved a simulated invasion of a hostile country, with Bravo Company tasked with seizing and holding key terrain features while supporting elements attacked enemy positions. It was the kind of complex, multi-phase operation that tested every aspect of Marine Corps training. Sarah's squad was assigned to provide security for the company command post, which would be established on a small hill overlooking the main objective area. It wasn't the most exciting mission, but it was crucial for the success of the overall operation. The first few days went smoothly. Sarah and her squad mates established defensive positions around the command post, conducted regular patrols, and maintained communication with other elements of the company. The work was demanding, especially in the desert heat, but Sarah had trained for this kind of environment. On the fourth day of the exercise, everything changed. The scenario called for enemy forces to launch a counterattack against the Marine positions. This would be simulated by Marines from another unit acting as opposing forces, or OPFOR. They would attempt to infiltrate the Marine positions and disrupt the command structure. Sarah was on guard duty at 0300 hours when she spotted movement in the darkness about 200 meters from the command post. Through her night vision goggles, she could see two figures moving carefully between the desert bushes, trying to stay low and avoid detection. Following her training, Sarah whispered the challenge password, Thunder. She waited for the correct response, which should have been lightning. Instead, she heard nothing but the sound of the wind across the desert. Sarah immediately alerted Corporal Wilson, who was sleeping in a fighting position about 20 meters away. Wilson grabbed his radio and called the command post. "Command post, this is Wilson. We've got possible enemy movement 200 meters northeast of your position, 2 personnel." The response came back immediately. "Wilson, maintain observation and report any changes. Do not engage unless they attempt to breach the perimeter." Sarah continued watching through her night vision device as the two figures moved closer. They were definitely trying to infiltrate the command post, probably to capture key personnel and declare the exercise a success for the opposing forces. But something felt wrong. Sarah had participated in enough training exercises to know how OPFOR usually operated. They were typically more aggressive, moving faster, and with less concern for detection. These two figures were moving like real infiltrators, not Marines playing a role in an exercise. "Wilson," Sarah whispered, "something's not right about this." Wilson crawled over to Sarah's position and looked through his own night vision device. "What do you mean? Look at how they're moving. They're too good. OPFOR usually makes more noise and takes more chances because they know it's just training. These guys are moving like they really don't want to be caught." Wilson studied the two figures for several minutes. "You might be right, but we can't just assume they're not part of the exercise. We follow the rules of engagement unless we're told otherwise." The two figures continued their approach toward the command post. When they were about 50 meters away, Sarah could see that they were wearing military clothing, but not the standard Marine Corps uniform. Their gear looked different too, more like what Special Operations Forces might wear. "Wilson, I really don't think these are our guys," Sarah said urgently. Wilson made a decision. He grabbed his radio and called the command post again. "Command post, this is Wilson. I need you to confirm that OPFOR is operating in our sector tonight." There was a pause before the response came back. "Wilson, negative OPFOR activity is scheduled in your area. All opposing forces are operating at least 1 kilometer south of your position." The implication was immediate and terrifying. If these weren't Marines participating in the training exercise, then who were they? "Command post, We have two unknown personnel approaching your position from the northeast. They're not part of the exercise. Request immediate guidance." The response was swift and clear. "Wilson, treat this as a real security threat. Alert all positions and prepare to defend the command post." Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but her training took over. She had prepared for this kind of situation, even if she had never expected to face it during what was supposed to be a routine training exercise. Within minutes, every Marine in the security detachment was awake and in position. The company commander, Captain Roberts, had been alerted and was coordinating with base security forces. The two unknown figures had stopped moving when they apparently realized their presence had been detected. "This is the United States Marines," Captain Roberts announced through a megaphone. "You are approaching a restricted military area. Identify yourselves immediately and comply with all instructions." The response came in the form of gunfire. The muzzle flashes lit up the desert darkness as automatic weapons opened fire on the Marine positions. Sarah could hear bullets whistling overhead and striking the rocks around her fighting position. "Contact! Contact!" Wilson shouted into his radio. "We are taking small arms fire from two positions northeast of the command post." Sarah returned fire with her M16A4 rifle, aiming at the muzzle flashes where the enemy gunfire was originating. Her marksmanship training took over as she focused on her breathing, sight alignment, and trigger control. The firefight lasted only about 3 minutes, but it felt like hours. Sarah could hear Captain Roberts on the radio, coordinating with base security forces and requesting immediate backup. Other Marines in the security detachment were returning fire and moving to better defensive positions. When the shooting stopped, an eerie silence settled over the desert. Sarah kept her weapon trained on the area where she had last seen enemy muzzle flashes, waiting for any sign of movement. Base security forces arrived within 10 minutes, their vehicles racing across the desert with sirens blaring. Military police, armed response teams, and medical personnel quickly secured the area and began searching for the intruders. What they found shocked everyone. The two unknown figures were not foreign terrorists or enemy soldiers. They were American citizens who had been planning to infiltrate the military base and steal weapons and equipment. Both men were members of an anti-government militia group that believed the federal government was planning to impose martial law on the American people. One of the men had been wounded during the firefight and was taken to the base hospital for treatment. The other had been captured unhurt and was in custody. Neither man was seriously injured, thanks largely to the professionalism and restraint shown by the Marines who had responded to the threat. Captain Roberts gathered the security detachment for a debrief early the next morning. Every Marine who had been involved in the incident had to provide a detailed account of what they had seen and done. When it came time for Sarah to give her statement, she spoke clearly and professionally about spotting the initial movement, alerting Corporal Wilson, and returning fire when the intruders opened fire on Marine positions. "Lance Corporal Martinez," Captain Roberts said when she finished, "you detected the initial threat and alerted your chain of command appropriately. Your actions potentially prevented a serious security breach and possible casualties among your fellow Marines." Sarah felt proud, but also sobered by the incident. She had joined the Marines knowing that she might face combat situations, but she had expected them to occur overseas against foreign enemies, not in the California desert against American citizens. The incident made national news, though the Marine Corps released only limited information about the details. Sarah's name was not mentioned in any public reports, but within the Marine Corps, word spread quickly about the young female Marine who had spotted the infiltrators and helped prevent what could have been a much more serious incident. Staff Sergeant Davis pulled Sarah aside a few days after the incident. "Martinez, you showed good judgment and professionalism during a dangerous situation. That's the kind of performance we expect from Marines, regardless of their gender or how long they've been in the Corps." The training exercise continued for another 2 weeks, but the mood was different after the real firefight. Everyone understood that military service involved real risks, even during routine training operations. When the company returned to Camp Pendleton, Sarah noticed that her fellow Marines treated her with increased respect. She had proven herself under fire, literally and figuratively. The questions about whether a small woman could handle the pressures of military service had been answered definitively. Corporal Wilson submitted Sarah for a letter of commendation for her performance during the incident. The letter, signed by the battalion commander, praised her outstanding vigilance, professional judgment, and exemplary performance of duty under dangerous conditions. But for Sarah, the most meaningful recognition came from her squad mates. During the company formation, when they returned from 29 Palms, Lance Corporal Rodriguez, one of the Marines who had initially questioned whether women belonged in combat units, approached her. "Martinez," he said simply, "I'm glad you were watching our six that night." Sarah understood that this was Rodriguez's way of saying that he accepted her as a full member of the team. She had not asked for special recognition or different treatment. She had simply done her job as a Marine, and that was enough. As Sarah settled back into the routine at Camp Pendleton, she realized that she had crossed an important threshold. She was no longer the new female Marine who had to prove herself. She was simply Lance Corporal Martinez, a reliable and competent Marine who happened to be a woman. The distinction was important, not just for Sarah's own confidence, but for how others viewed her place in the Marine Corps. She had earned her position through performance, not through any special consideration or lowered standards. The months that followed brought new challenges and opportunities. Sarah continued to excel in training exercises, qualified as an expert marksman with multiple weapon systems, and was selected for advanced courses in combat life-saving and communications. More importantly, she had found her place in the Brotherhood of Marines. The Corps had not changed to accommodate her. Instead, she had proven that she belonged in an institution that valued excellence, courage, and commitment above all else. The young woman from Texas who had walked into a Marine recruiting office wanting to serve her country had become exactly what she had hoped to become, a United States Marine ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. 2 years into her Marine Corps career, Corporal Sarah Martinez received orders that would change everything. She was being transferred to the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Unit, based out of Camp Pendleton, as part of a deployment to the Middle East. The 3rd MEU was known as one of the most deployable and combat-ready units in the Marine Corps, and Sarah felt both honored and nervous to be selected for the assignment. The orders came with an additional surprise. Sarah would be assigned as a marksmanship instructor and designated marksman for Lima Company, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. The position required advanced training at the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School, a program that had only recently been opened to female Marines. Scout Sniper School was held at Marine Corps Base Quantico in Virginia, the same base where Marine officers were trained. The course was notorious for its high dropout rate and demanding standards. Even experienced Marines who were expert marksmen sometimes failed to complete the program. Sarah arrived at Quantico on a cold February morning, carrying her sea bag and a letter of recommendation from her commanding officer at Camp Pendleton. The letter praised her exceptional marksmanship abilities and leadership potential, but Sarah knew that none of that would matter once the course began. The Scout Sniper School commandant was Master Gunnery Sergeant William Patterson, a 30-year veteran who had served multiple combat deployments and trained hundreds of Marines in advanced marksmanship techniques. Patterson had an intimidating presence and a reputation for maintaining the highest possible standards. Marines, Patterson announced to the 24 students who had assembled for the course orientation, "Welcome to Scout Sniper School. Over the next 10 weeks, you will learn skills that can save Marine lives on the battlefield. You will also discover whether you have what it takes to operate independently behind enemy lines." Sarah looked around at her fellow students. She was the only woman in the class, and one of the smallest Marines present. Most of her classmates were seasoned corporals and sergeants who had already proven themselves in previous deployments. The first phase of the course focused on marksmanship fundamentals and fieldcraft. Students learned advanced techniques for reading wind, calculating distance, and engaging targets at extreme ranges. They studied camouflage, concealment, and the art of moving undetected through hostile territory. Sarah excelled in the classroom portions of the training. Her years of studying ballistics and meteorology as hobbies serve her well when instructors cover topics like bullet trajectory and atmospheric effects on long-range shooting. She took detailed notes and asked thoughtful questions that demonstrated her commitment to mastering the material. The practical exercises were more challenging. Students had to demonstrate their ability to stalk within 200 yards of instructors without being detected, then take accurate shots at targets while remaining hidden. It was a skill that required patience, physical endurance, and mental discipline. On her first stalking exercise, Sarah spent 6 hours crawling through thick Virginia woods in freezing rain, trying to get close enough to her target to take a shot. She moved slowly and carefully, using natural vegetation to break up her outline and avoiding any movements that might attract attention. When she finally reached a position where she could engage the target, Sarah discovered that her rifle scope had fogged up during the long crawl. She had to wait another hour for the scope to clear while remaining perfectly still in her concealed position. The shot she eventually took was perfect, striking the target dead center at a range of 350 yards. But the instructors failed her for the exercise because she had taken too long to engage the target. In combat, they explained, a sniper who couldn't adapt to equipment problems quickly might miss critical opportunities or endanger other Marines. Corporal Martinez, Master Gunnery Sergeant Patterson, said after the exercise, "You have excellent shooting skills, but sniping is about more than just marksmanship. It's about problem-solving under pressure and completing the mission regardless of the obstacles you encounter." Sarah accepted the criticism without complaint and threw herself into improving her field craft skills. She practiced moving through different types of terrain, learned to waterproof her equipment more effectively, and developed backup plans for every possible equipment failure. The second stalking exercise went better. Sarah completed her approach in 4 hours, adapted to a sudden change in wind direction that affected her shot placement, and successfully engaged 3 different targets from the same concealed position. The instructors passed her without comment, which was the closest thing to praise that students received during the course. As the weeks progressed, the class size steadily decreased. Marines who couldn't meet the physical demands dropped out. Others failed written examinations or practical exercises. Some simply decided that the pressure and isolation required for sniper work didn't suit their personalities. Sarah never considered quitting, even during the most difficult phases of training. When other students complained about the cold, the rain, or the demanding schedules, she remained focused on learning everything she could from the instructors. The urban warfare phase of training took place at a mock city constructed on the Quantico training grounds. Students learned to operate in urban environments, engaging targets from building rooftops and concealed positions within structures. They practiced coordinating with infantry units and calling in artillery or airstrikes when necessary. During one urban exercise, Sarah was paired with Lance Corporal David Kim, a quiet Marine from California who had been one of the top performers in the class. Their mission was to provide overwatch for a simulated raid on a terrorist safe house. Sarah and Kim established their position on the roof of a building overlooking the target structure. They had clear fields of fire covering all the approach routes that the raiding party would use. Their job was to eliminate any threats that emerged from the building while the assault team was moving into position. The exercise began at dawn, with the assault team moving through the mock city toward their objective. Sarah tracked their progress through her rifle scope, ready to provide supporting fire if needed. Suddenly, enemy fighters began emerging from several buildings that the intelligence briefing had indicated were empty. The assault team was walking into an ambush, and Sarah and Kim were the only Marines in position to help them. Multiple hostiles emerging from buildings 2 and 4, Sarah reported over the radio. Assault team, you have enemies moving to flank your position from the east. Kim engaged targets from building 4, while Sarah focused on the fighters emerging from building 2. The simulated enemy forces were actually Marine instructors wearing special equipment that would indicate when they had been hit by the training ammunition. Sarah's first shot struck an instructor who was setting up a machine gun position that could have devastated the assault team. Her second shot eliminated another instructor who was moving to a flanking position. Within 30 seconds, she had engaged 6 different targets, scoring hits on all of them. The exercise concluded with the assault team successfully raiding their objective without taking any casualties. During the after-action review, the lead instructor praised the Overwatch team's performance. Martinez and Kim, he announced, your accurate and timely fire support prevented what could have been a disaster for the assault team. That's exactly the kind of performance we expect from Marine snipers. After the instructor dismissed the class, Kim approached Sarah. That was some impressive shooting, he said. I've never seen anyone engage that many targets that quickly while maintaining accuracy. Sarah appreciated the compliment, but she knew that accuracy under pressure was just one part of being an effective sniper. The most important skill was making good decisions about when to shoot and when to remain concealed. The final phase of Scout Sniper School involved a comprehensive field exercise that tested everything students had learned. Each student was given a complex mission that required them to infiltrate enemy territory, gather intelligence, and eliminate high-value targets without being detected. Sarah's mission involved penetrating a simulated enemy base, identifying the location of captured American personnel, and eliminating the enemy commander who was holding them. She would have to operate alone for 3 days, living off the supplies in her pack and avoiding detection by enemy patrols. The exercise area covered 50 square miles of Virginia wilderness, with instructors playing the role of enemy forces. They used vehicles, aircraft, and sophisticated detection equipment to hunt for the student snipers. Getting caught meant automatic failure. Sarah spent the first day moving carefully through dense forest toward the objective area. She traveled only at night, hiding during daylight hours in carefully concealed positions. Her progress was slow, but she avoided several enemy patrols that might have detected a less careful approach. On the second day, she reached a position where she could observe the simulated enemy base. Through her spotting scope, she identified the building where the capture personnel were being held and located the enemy command post where her target would be found. The challenge was getting close enough to take the required shots without being detected by the guards and patrols that surrounded the base. Sarah spent hours studying the enemy patrol patterns, looking for gaps in their coverage that she could exploit. She decided to approach the base during the early morning hours, when enemy sentries would be tired and less alert. Sarah moved to within 400 yards of the command post, using a small ridge to conceal her position from enemy observation. At exactly 0600 hours, her target emerged from the command post building. Sarah had one opportunity to take the shot before the enemy commander would be surrounded by bodyguards who would make a clean shot impossible. Sarah controlled her breathing, confirmed her range estimation, and squeezed the trigger smoothly. The simulated ammunition struck the target's center mass, indicating a successful elimination of the enemy commander. Now she had to escape from the area before enemy forces could locate her position. Sarah packed her equipment quickly and began moving away from the base using a route she had planned during her reconnaissance. Enemy forces immediately began searching for the sniper who had eliminated their commander. Sarah could hear vehicles and helicopters moving through the area as the instructors tried to locate her position. She remained hidden in thick vegetation during the day and continued her escape movement during the hours of darkness. On the third day, Sarah reached the designated extraction point where she was supposed to signal for pickup. She used a small radio to contact the exercise controllers and confirm that she had successfully completed her mission. Sniper 1, this is Control, came the response. Confirm target elimination and intelligence gathering complete. Control, this is Sniper 1, Sarah replied. Target eliminated at 0600 hours. Intelligence package complete. Request extraction. Sniper 1, extraction helicopter inbound your position. Pop smoke to mark your location. Sarah activated a smoke grenade that would allow the helicopter crew to locate her position. Within minutes, she could hear the distinctive sound of a huge 60 Black Hawk approaching through the trees. When Sarah climbed aboard the helicopter, she was exhausted, dirty, and dehydrated. But she had successfully completed the most challenging training exercise of her Marine Corps career. Master Gunnery Sergeant Patterson was waiting when the helicopter landed back at the school headquarters. He reviewed Sarah's performance during the field exercise and confirmed that she had met all the requirements for graduation. Corporal Martinez, Patterson said, "You've demonstrated the skills and judgment necessary to serve as a Marine sniper. You will graduate from this course and be awarded the military occupational specialty of Scout Sniper." The graduation ceremony was small and informal. Only 12 of the original 24 students had successfully completed the course. Sarah was the first woman to graduate from the program, but Patterson made no special mention of her gender during the ceremony. These Marines, Patterson told the small audience of instructors and family members, have completed the most demanding training the Marine Corps offers. They're now qualified to serve as snipers and reconnaissance specialists in any environment against any enemy. Sarah's mother, Maria, had flown out from Texas to attend the graduation. She watched with tears in her eyes as Sarah received her certificate and the distinctive Scout Sniper badge that she would wear on her uniform. "Mija, your father would be so proud," Maria whispered as she hugged her daughter after the ceremony. Sarah felt proud too, but she also understood that graduating from Scout Sniper School was just the beginning. She was now qualified to serve in one of the most challenging and dangerous positions in the Marine Corps, and she would soon have the opportunity to put her new skills to the test in combat. Her orders to deploy with the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Unit were still waiting, and Sarah knew that the training she had just completed would be crucial for the missions that lay ahead. As she packed her belongings for the trip back to Camp Pendleton, Sarah reflected on how much she had learned and grown since that day 2 years earlier when she had first walked into the Marine recruiting office in Texas. She was no longer the uncertain young woman who wondered if she could succeed in the Marines. She was now a professionally trained sniper, ready to serve her country in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. The transport ship USS Kearsarge cut through the Mediterranean Sea toward the coast of Somalia, carrying 2,200 Marines of the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Unit. Sergeant Sarah Martinez stood on the flight deck, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and orange. After 8 months of additional training following Scout Sniper School, she was finally heading to her first combat deployment. The mission was officially described as humanitarian assistance and peacekeeping, but everyone aboard the ship understood that Somalia was a dangerous place where Marines might face combat at any moment. Various militant groups controlled different regions of the country, and the security situation changed daily. Sarah's role as a designated marksman meant she would provide precision fire support for her company during operations ashore. She carried a specially modified M14 rifle equipped with advanced optics and ammunition designed for long-range engagements. More importantly, she was trained to make split-second decisions about when lethal force was justified in complex situations where civilians and combatants might be mixed together. Colonel Jennifer Hayes, the commanding officer of the 3rd MEU, gathered all company commanders and key personnel for a final briefing before the unit went ashore. Colonel Hayes was a 20-year Marine veteran who had commanded combat operations in both Iraq and Afghanistan. She had a reputation for thorough planning and decisive leadership under pressure. "Marines," Colonel Hayes began, "our mission in Somalia is to provide security for humanitarian aid operations and support the efforts of international peacekeeping forces. However, you should understand that we are deploying into an active combat zone where American forces have been attacked repeatedly over the past 6 months." Sarah listened carefully as Colonel Hayes described the threats they would face. Improvised explosive devices planted along roadways. Sniper attacks from concealed positions in urban areas. Rocket-propelled grenades fired at Marine positions from residential neighborhoods where civilians might be used as human shields. The rules of engagement are clear, Colonel Hayes continued. You have the right to defend yourselves and to protect civilian lives when they are threatened by hostile forces. But every shot you fire will be scrutinized by the media, by politicians, and by our allies. You must be absolutely certain of your targets before you engage. Sarah's company, Lima Company, would be responsible for securing the port city of Kismayo, where international aid organizations were attempting to distribute food and medical supplies to thousands of displaced civilians. The city had been controlled by various militant groups for years, and previous attempts to establish security had failed. The Marines went ashore on a gray morning in early October, riding in amphibious assault vehicles that churned through the surf toward the beaches outside Kismayo. Sarah sat in the cramped vehicle with 11 other Marines, checking her equipment one final time and reviewing the maps of their assigned sector. Lima Company established their command post in a former government building near the port, while individual platoons were assigned to secure key intersections and patrol routes throughout the city. Sarah was attached to 2nd Platoon, commanded by Lieutenant Michael Chun, a recent graduate of the basic school who was leading Marines in combat for the first time. The first few days in Kismayo were relatively quiet. The Marines established their presence in the city, met with local leaders, and began escorting aid convoys to distribution points. Sarah and her spotter, Lance Corporal Tommy Rodriguez, set up observation posts on rooftops that provided overwatch for Marine patrols moving through the city. On the 4th day, everything changed. Sarah was in a concealed position on top of a 3-story building when she spotted a man in civilian clothing setting up what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher in an alley about 400 meters away. Through her rifle scope, she could see that the weapon was aimed toward a nearby intersection where Marine patrol was scheduled to pass in approximately 10 minutes. Rodriguez, I've got a possible hostile setting up an RPG in the alley between buildings 7 and 8, Sarah whispered in her radio headset. Rodriguez scanned the area with his binoculars. I see him. Looks like he's trying to get into position to ambush the patrol. Sarah faced a difficult decision. The rules of engagement authorized her to fire on anyone who posed an imminent threat to American or civilian lives. But she couldn't be absolutely certain that the man was actually preparing to attack the Marines. He might be a civilian who had found an old weapon, or he might be planning to target someone else entirely. Rodriguez called Lieutenant Chun and informed him of the situation. Tell him we need guidance on whether to engage. Rodriguez contacted the platoon commander and explained what they were observing. Lieutenant Chin's response came back quickly. Maintain observation and be prepared to engage if he targets the patrol. Do not fire unless you are certain of hostile intent. Sarah kept her rifle trained on the man in the alley while Rodriguez continued to observe with his binoculars. The Marine patrol was now only 5 minutes away from the intersection where the RPG seemed to be aimed. Suddenly, the man shouldered his weapon and aimed it directly at the intersection where the Marines would appear. There was no longer any doubt about his intentions. Rodriguez, he's taking aim at the intersection. The patrol is walking into an ambush. Take the shot, Rodriguez confirmed. Clear hostile intent. Sarah controlled her breathing and settled her rifle's crosshairs on the center of the man's chest. At 400 meters, she had to account for wind direction and the slight downward angle from her rooftop position. She had practiced this exact type of shot hundreds of times during training. The rifle bucked against her shoulder as she squeezed the trigger. Through her scope, Sarah saw the man with the RPG fall backward as the bullet struck him. The weapon clattered to the ground, unfired. Target down, Sarah reported over the radio. RPG threat eliminated. Lieutenant Chin's voice came back immediately. Good shot, Martinez. Patrol is now aware of the threat and moving to secure the area. Within minutes, Marines from the patrol had reached the alley and confirmed that Sarah had eliminated a hostile fighter who had been preparing to ambush them. The rocket-propelled grenade was loaded and ready to fire. If Sarah had hesitated or missed her shot, several Marines might have been killed or wounded. Colonel Hayes visited Sarah's position the next day to personally commend her for the engagement. Sergeant Martinez, your quick thinking and accurate shooting saved Marine lives yesterday. That's exactly the kind of professional performance we expect from our designated marksmen. But the successful engagement also attracted unwanted attention from enemy forces in the city. Sarah's muzzle flash had been visible from her rooftop position, and hostile forces now knew that American snipers were operating in the area. Over the next week, Sarah and Rodriguez had to constantly change their observation positions to avoid being targeted by enemy snipers who were trying to hunt them down. They moved from building to building, never staying in the same location for more than a few hours. The cat and mouse game came to a head during a major aid distribution operation at the city's main market. Lima Company was providing security for trucks carrying food and medical supplies to thousands of hungry civilians. The operation required careful coordination between Marines and aid workers to prevent stampedes or riots that could result in civilian casualties. Sarah had established an overwatch position in a minaret overlooking the market square. From her elevated position, she could see the entire area where Marines and aid workers were attempting to maintain order while distributing supplies. The distribution had been proceeding smoothly for about an hour when Sarah spotted muzzle flashes from a building on the opposite side of the square. Someone was firing on the Marines and civilians in the market. Rodriguez, hostile fire from the white building with the blue door, second-floor window, Sarah reported. Rodriguez called for immediate suppressive fire from Marine units on the ground, while Sarah tried to locate the enemy shooter through her rifle scope. The hostile fire was coming from a window that was partially concealed by hanging laundry, making it difficult to identify the exact location of the threat. Sarah waited patiently, keeping her rifle aimed at the window where she had seen the muzzle flashes. Enemy snipers often fired a few shots and then moved to a different position, but this one seemed to be staying in place. After several minutes, Sarah saw a brief movement at the window as the enemy sniper prepared to fire again. She had only a split second to take her shot before the hostile fire resumed. The shot was one of the most challenging of Sarah's career. The target was partially concealed, the range was over 500 meters, and wind was gusting unpredictably through the urban environment. Missing could mean that the enemy sniper would continue to threaten Marines and civilians in the market below. Sarah fired once and immediately saw the enemy weapon fall from the window to the street below. The hostile fire stopped completely. Target neutralized, Sarah reported. Enemy sniper down. Ground forces later confirmed that Sarah had eliminated a trained sniper who had been responsible for several attacks on international peacekeeping forces. The weapon recovered from the scene was a high-quality rifle equipped with advanced optics, indicating that this had been an experienced and well-equipped enemy fighter. The successful counter-sniper engagement earned Sarah recognition from the entire Marine Expeditionary Unit. More importantly, it demonstrated that American forces could effectively respond to any threats posed by hostile forces in the city. The remainder of Lima Company's deployment in Somalia was marked by several smaller engagements, but none as significant as Sarah's 2 sniper kills. The Marines successfully established security conditions that allowed aid organizations to distribute supplies to thousands of civilians who desperately needed food and medical care. After 4 months in Somalia, the 3rd MEU was relieved by another Marine unit and sailed home to Camp Pendleton. Sarah had fired her rifle in combat 7 times during the deployment, with each engagement being reviewed and approved by military lawyers who confirmed that all of her actions were justified under the rules of engagement. On the voyage home, Lieutenant Shun approached Sarah while she was cleaning her rifle on the ship's deck. "Sergeant Martinez, I want you to know that your performance in Somalia was exemplary. You made difficult decisions under pressure, and you saved lives." Sarah appreciated the lieutenant's words, but she was already thinking about the future. The deployment had given her valuable combat experience, but it had also shown her how much more she had to learn about operating in complex environments where military and humanitarian missions intersected. When the ship docked at San Diego, Sarah was met by her mother and her former drill instructor, Staff Sergeant Williams, who had driven down from the Marine Corps recruit depot. Williams had followed Sarah's career with interest, and he wanted to congratulate her on her combat performance. "Martinez," Williams said, "you've brought honor to the Corps and to all the Marines who trained you. Your father would be proud of the Marine you've become." As Sarah walked off the ship carrying her sea bag and rifle case, she reflected on how much she had changed since that nervous young woman had first reported to boot camp 3 years earlier. She was now a combat veteran with proven leadership abilities and specialized skills that made her valuable to the Marine Corps. But Sarah also understood that her journey was far from over. The Marine Corps was an institution that constantly evolved to meet new challenges, and she wanted to be part of that evolution. Her experiences in Somalia had shown her the importance of precision, judgment, and moral courage in complex situations. More importantly, Sarah had proven to herself and others that gender was irrelevant to combat effectiveness. She had performed exactly the same missions as her male counterparts, under the same dangerous conditions, with the same professional standards. Her success had opened doors for other women who wanted to serve in combat roles, and Sarah took that responsibility seriously. The young woman from Texas who had wanted to honor her father's military service had become something she had never imagined, a role model for future generations of Marines, regardless of their gender. But the most important recognition would come from an unexpected source, in circumstances that would test everything Sarah had learned about honor, courage, and commitment. 6 months after returning from Somalia, Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez received orders that surprised everyone, including herself. She was being assigned to Marine Corps headquarters in Washington, D.C., as part of a special task force studying the integration of women into previously male-only military occupational specialties. It was a significant career opportunity, but Sarah worried that it would take her away from the operational units, where she felt most useful. The assignment came with a promotion to Staff Sergeant and a move to the nation's capital, where Sarah would work directly with senior Marine Corps leadership on policies that would affect thousands of Marines. Her combat experience and proven performance made her an ideal candidate to provide input on how women could be successfully integrated into combat roles. The task force was led by Brigadier General Patricia Sullivan, a pioneering female Marine who had commanded logistics units during multiple combat deployments. General Sullivan had a reputation for being brilliant, demanding, and absolutely committed to ensuring that any policy changes were based on performance standards rather than political considerations. Staff Sergeant Martinez, General Sullivan said during Sarah's first meeting at Marine Corps headquarters, "Your record speaks for itself. Combat vétéran, expert marksman, proven leader. You're here because we need Marines who understand what it actually takes to succeed in combat units, not because we need someone to fill a diversity quota." Sarah appreciated the general's directness. Throughout her career, she had wondered whether some of her opportunities were related to her gender rather than her abilities. General Sullivan's comment confirmed that her assignment was based on merit. The task force's work was complex and politically sensitive. Congress had mandated that all military services open combat positions to qualified women, but the implementation details were left to each service to determine. The Marine Corps had to develop physical standards, training protocols, and policies that would ensure successful integration without compromising combat effectiveness. Sarah's role involved reviewing current training programs, interviewing Marines from various combat specialties, and helping to design assessment standards that would be applied equally to all Marines regardless of gender. It was challenging work that required her to think beyond her own experiences and consider the needs of the entire Marine Corps. One of the most difficult issues involved physical standards for combat positions. Some Marines argued that women should meet exactly the same physical requirements as men, while others suggested that different standards might be appropriate as long as they were related to actual job performance. Sarah found herself in the middle of heated debates between Marines who held strong opinions on both sides of the issue. Her own experience suggested that the most important qualities for combat effectiveness were judgment, professionalism, and the ability to perform under pressure rather than raw physical strength. During one particularly intense meeting, Colonel Robert Thompson, a veteran infantry officer, argued that lowering physical standards to accommodate women would endanger Marine lives. Staff Sergeant Martinez might be an exceptional Marine, Thompson said, but we can't base policy on exceptions. The average woman cannot meet the physical demands of infantry combat, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. Sarah had remained silent during most of the meeting, but General Sullivan looked directly at her. Staff Sergeant Martinez, you've actually served in combat. What's your assessment? Sarah chose her words carefully. Sir, in my experience, combat effectiveness depends on many factors. Physical strength is important, but it's not the only factor. Mental toughness, marksmanship, tactical knowledge, and the ability to make good decisions under pressure are equally important. She paused and looked around the room. I've served with male Marines who were physically strong but cracked under pressure. I've also served with smaller Marines, both male and female, who consistently performed well in dangerous situations. I think our standards should focus on the actual requirements of each job rather than assumptions about what different groups can or cannot do. Colonel Thompson was not convinced. Staff Sergeant, with respect, you're talking about specialized positions like sniper or intelligence. Infantry Marines have to carry heavy equipment for long distances, dig fighting positions in hard soil, and physically maneuver wounded Marines to safety. Those tasks require upper body strength that most women simply don't possess. Sarah understood Colonel Thompson's concerns, and she didn't disagree with his assessment of the physical demands of infantry service. But she also believed that qualified individuals should have the opportunity to try, regardless of their gender. The debate continued for months, with the task force conducting studies, reviewing data from other military services, and consulting with combat veterans from various specialties. Sarah's input was valued because she could speak from actual experience rather than theoretical knowledge. During this time, Sarah continued to train and maintain her military skills, even though her current assignment was primarily administrative. She qualified annually with her rifle, participated in physical fitness training, and attended professional development courses when her schedule permitted. One morning in April, Sarah was working in her office at Marine Corps headquarters when she received an unexpected phone call. Major General David Rodriguez, the commanding general of the 1st Marine Division, was calling to inform her that she had been selected for a special assignment. Staff Sergeant Martinez, General Rodriguez said, I need an experienced sniper for a sensitive mission that's coming up in a few weeks. Your name was recommended by several officers who worked with you in Somalia, and your current assignment at headquarters makes you available for temporary duty. The mission involved providing security for a high-level diplomatic meeting between American officials and leaders from several African nations. The meeting would be held at a remote location where traditional security measures might not be sufficient. Marine snipers would provide overwatch to ensure that the diplomatic personnel could conduct their business safely. Sarah was honored to be selected for the mission, but she was also surprised. Sir, there are many qualified snipers available. Why was I specifically requested? General Rodriguez's answer was straightforward. Staff Sergeant, this particular mission involves protecting female diplomats who specifically requested female security personnel. Your combat experience and specialized training make you the ideal candidate. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself on a military transport aircraft flying toward a location in East Africa that had not been disclosed to anyone not directly involved in the mission. She carried her customized M40A5 sniper rifle and enough ammunition and equipment to support operations for up to 2 weeks. The diplomatic meeting was being held at a former colonial mansion that had been converted into a conference center. The location was isolated, surrounded by several miles of open terrain that provided good fields of observation for security forces. Sarah and 3 other Marine snipers would provide overwatch from concealed positions around the perimeter. The mission seemed routine until the second day, when intelligence reports indicated that hostile forces in the region had become aware of the diplomatic meeting and were planning to disrupt it. The threat was serious enough that the mission commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, considered evacuating the diplomatic personnel immediately. The problem, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell explained during a security briefing, is that we don't know exactly what kind of threat we're facing or when it might materialize. Moving the diplomats now might be more dangerous than keeping them here, where we can provide adequate security. Sarah was assigned to an observation post on a hill about 800 meters from the conference center. Her position provided excellent visibility of the main approach routes that hostile forces would likely use if they attempted to attack the diplomatic meeting. On the third night of the conference, Sarah spotted vehicle movement on a road about 2 kilometers from her position. Through her night vision scope, she could see several trucks moving without lights toward the conference center. The vehicles stopped about 1 kilometer away, and armed figures began dismounting. "Command, this is Overwatch 2, Sarah reported over her radio. "I have multiple vehicles with armed personnel approximately 1 kilometer northeast of the objective. Estimate 20 to 30 hostile personnel." Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's response was immediate. "Overwatch 2, maintain observation and report any movement toward the objective. Do not engage unless the diplomats are in imminent danger." Sarah continued to watch the hostile force through her rifle scope. The armed figures were clearly conducting reconnaissance of the conference center, using binoculars and what appeared to be night vision equipment to study the facility and its security measures. After about an hour, the hostile force began moving closer to the conference center. They were advancing in small groups, using natural cover to avoid detection by the Marine security forces positioned around the perimeter. "Command, hostile force is advancing toward the objective in small groups. They appear to be conducting a coordinated approach using covered routes." "Overwatch 2, can you determine their intentions? Are they conducting reconnaissance or preparing for an assault?" Sarah studied the movement patterns through her scope. The hostile force was moving with military precision, suggesting that they were trained fighters rather than a random group of criminals. More importantly, several of them were carrying rocket-propelled grenades and automatic weapons that could devastate the security forces protecting the diplomats. "Command, based on their equipment and movement patterns, I assess this as preparation for an assault rather than simple reconnaissance." Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell had to make a difficult decision. The diplomatic meeting was scheduled to conclude the next morning, and evacuating the personnel during the night might be more dangerous than allowing them to complete their work. But if the hostile force was planning an immediate assault, waiting might result in casualties among the diplomats and their security details. "Overwatch 2, continue to monitor the situation. If hostile forces move within 500 meters of the objective, you are authorized to engage." Sarah acknowledged the order and settled into position for what might be a long night. Through her rifle scope, she could see individual members of the hostile force as they continued their approach toward the conference center. At approximately 0300 hours, the hostile force began their final approach. Sarah could see muzzle flashes as they opened fire on the Marine security positions around the conference center. Rocket-propelled grenades exploded near the building where the diplomatic personnel were sheltering. "Command, we are under attack. Hostile force is assaulting the objective with small arms and RPGs." Sarah immediately began engaging targets that posed the greatest threat to the diplomats and their security forces. Her first shot eliminated a hostile fighter who was preparing to fire an RPG at the main conference building. Her second shot stopped an enemy machine gunner who was providing covering fire for other attackers. The battle lasted approximately 20 minutes, with Marine security forces repelling the assault and forcing the surviving hostile fighters to withdraw. Sarah fired 8 rounds during the engagement, accounting for 6 confirmed enemy casualties, including several leaders who had been directing the assault. When the sun rose a few hours later, the diplomatic meeting concluded successfully with agreements that would affect American foreign policy in the region for years to come. The security operation had been a complete success, with no casualties among the diplomatic personnel or their Marine protectors. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell personally visited Sarah's position after the battle. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, your accurate fire last night disrupted the enemy assault and prevented what could have been a catastrophic attack on American diplomatic personnel. But the most meaningful recognition came later that morning, when the diplomatic delegation prepared to depart for their return journey to the United States. Sarah was cleaning her rifle near the landing zone where the helicopters would pick up the diplomats when she noticed a distinguished-looking woman in civilian clothes approaching her position. The woman was Secretary of State Elizabeth Warren, one of the most senior officials in the American government. Sarah immediately stood at attention, unsure of the proper protocol for interacting with such a high-ranking civilian official. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," Secretary Warren said, "I wanted to personally thank you for your service. Last night, you protected not only American lives, but also the success of diplomatic negotiations that will benefit millions of people in this region." Sarah remained at attention and replied formally, "Thank you, Madam Secretary. I was simply doing my job as a Marine." Secretary Warren smiled at Sarah's professionalism. "Staff Sergeant, I've been briefed on your background and your career. You've overcome significant challenges to serve your country in combat roles that were not traditionally open to women. Your success has helped pave the way for other young women who want to serve in the military." As Secretary Warren prepared to board her helicopter, she turned back to Sarah one final time. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, you represent the very best of American military service. Your country is fortunate to have Marines like you." After the diplomatic delegation departed, Sarah began packing her equipment for the return journey to Washington. The mission had been successful, but more importantly, it had demonstrated once again that gender was irrelevant to combat effectiveness. 3 months later, Sarah received notification that she had been selected for promotion to gunnery sergeant and assignment as a senior instructor at the Scout Sniper School where she had trained years earlier. The assignment would allow her to train the next generation of Marine snipers, including increasing numbers of women who were following the path that Sarah had helped to establish. On the day Sarah reported to her new assignment at Quantico, she was met by Master Gunnery Sergeant Patterson, who was still serving as the school's commandant. Patterson had watched Sarah's career with interest since her graduation, and he was pleased to have her back as an instructor. "Gunnery Sergeant Martinez," Patterson said, "you've come full circle. You learned to be a sniper here, you proved yourself in combat, and now you'll teach others. That's what the Marine Corps is all about. Each generation training the next to be even better." But the most significant moment came during Sarah's first class as an instructor, when she looked out at 24 new students beginning their sniper training. 8 of them were women, a dramatic increase from when Sarah had been the only female student in her class. As Sarah prepared to address her new students, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started as a young woman from Texas who wanted to honor her father's military service. Through determination, hard work, and the support of Marines who judged her by her performance rather than her gender, she had become a role model for others who wanted to serve their country. The lesson she wanted to teach went beyond marksmanship techniques or fieldcraft skills. She wanted her students to understand that the Marine Corps was an institution that valued excellence above all else, and that anyone willing to meet the standards could earn their place in the Brotherhood of Marines. Looking at the diverse group of Marines before her, Sarah realized that her father's legacy lived on not just in her own service, but in the opportunities she had helped create for others. The young woman who had been laughed at and doubted had become a leader whose example would inspire future generations of Marines. Sarah's story was far from over, but she had already achieved something that would outlast her own career. She had proven that courage, competence, and commitment were not determined by gender, and she had helped ensure that the Marine Corps would continue to find and develop the best leaders regardless of where they came from or what they looked like. As she began her first lesson, Sarah understood that this was her most important mission yet, ensuring that every Marine who wanted to serve their country would have the opportunity to prove themselves based on their abilities and dedication. It was a responsibility she accepted with the same determination that had carried her from a small town in Texas to the highest levels of military service. The Marines who had once laughed at her size and questioned her abilities would have been amazed to see Staff Sergeant Martinez standing before a new generation of warriors, preparing to train them in the skills and values that made the Marine Corps the most elite fighting force in the world. Her journey from doubt to respect, from questioning to acceptance, had come full circle in the most meaningful way possible.